Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the January 2020 meeting of the West Sacramento Area Flood Control Agency. To start, would you please join me in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And second, before we begin, I want to welcome Chris Ledesma, who is going to be representing Reclamation District 900 on the WSAFCA board. And welcome, Chris.
Thank you.
First matter, I don't see on here, usually we have approval of the agenda. Do we need to do that?
So we decided to change our agenda to match the format of the city's agenda just because we're JPA with the city and reclamation districts. Mm-hmm. So it's a little bit different now. Okay. So I don't believe that's necessary, but I'll check back with our city clerk to see if we can put that back on if you'd like.
Okay, well, I don't think we have any changes anyhow, so we'll
okay,
we'll the meetings. I want the minutes before together.
Okay, sure.
No, I'm kidding. I'm just kidding.
Noted.
Okay, well, public comment. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to speak on matters not on the agenda? Seeing none, we'll move forward to a report on the closed session.
Hello again. Good morning, members of the board. I'll reporting.
Council?
Yes, the agency met in closed session this morning on the one item listed on the closed session agenda and took no action.
Thank you. Monthly and year-to-date revenue and expense review. Jen.
Okay, sorry about that. Jumped the gun. Okay, so I'll be reporting out on the revenue and expenses for the month of November 2019. In Fund 870, the beginning balance was $6.4 million. There was no revenue, and our expenses were approximately $26,000, making our ending cash position not that different, so it's still the same at approximately $6.4 million. In Fund 871, our starting balance was negative $1.6 million. We received $3.1 in revenue for quarter 32 true-up, and the expenses were $283,000. Our ending cash position for 871 was approximately $1.3 million, making our overall cash position to be $6.4 million. As of January 9th, 2020, the agency's combined cash position was approximately $9.2 million. The statement of costs for quarter 33 through September 30th, 2019 are in review. DWR approved a real estate true-out payment of $231,000. Staff have submitted an advance request funding for $11 million to cash flow remaining work on the Southport Levee Improvement Project and federal project designed into fiscal year end. On January 8th of this year, the agency successfully refunded the 2011 bonds. The agency's debt is well rated, and both large and smaller scale institutional investors signed on to buy the bonds. Market conditions the day of the sale were good, with a 1.43 increase in net present value savings between preliminary pricing and proposed final pricing. Estimated annual savings increased to roughly about $150,000 per year. Final analysis and escrow will complete by the end of the month. That concludes my report. Do you have any questions?
Questions, anyone? No. Congratulations to all those involved in the bond refinancing. Thank you very much. Consent agenda. 2 items on the consent agenda. Do we have any comments or?
I'll move consent.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded to move the consent agenda. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. On to WSAFCA project updates.
Chair, I think we're going to back to the agenda.
Okay.
I'd like to move 4C ahead of, 4B ahead of 4A, and let Paul do an update on the
Very well.
Southport project.
Very well.
Can you cue me up, Jed?
That's fine. Thank you.
So not knowing who was going to be our RD 900 representative, I put together a short presentation about what's been going on with the restoration project. So first of all, just to remind everybody, just 120 acres that we are restoring in the floodplain is to deal with a couple of permitting conditions that we have. One from the Army Corps of Engineers for our 404 permit, where we're replacing waters of the U.S. By building and incorporating 14 plus acres of open water, mixed riparian, and emergent marsh. As part of our permitting for Village Parkway, we took out approximately 177 acres of trees. Ken Gillespie, who was formerly our engineer on that project, negotiated with California Department of Fish and Wildlife to do a 1 inch to 1 tree replacement. So those will also be within the Southport area. We'll be meeting we have a team that works on the restoration project that will be meeting with California Fish and Wildlife so that we're not specifically just counting 177 trees year over year for the next 5 years, that it's part of a much larger project. Anyways, that's kind of where we're moving. I'll get into a little bit more of that as we go forward. And then ultimately, this is to produce high-quality habitat. And you will see over the course of time of how that's going to change. You'll start seeing different bird types and a lot more bugs and bunnies of different natures as time goes forward. So just to show you that both areas have been designed to try to meet some of these mitigation measures as well as to provide this high quality habitat areas. So we have quite a bit of, 15 acres of open water and emergent marsh. We have over 60 acres of riparian scrub and forest, and then over 40 some acres of woodlands. And so all of those trees went in, most of those trees went into the ground this year. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. So this is kind of what happened at the beginning of the season. We had site preparation. There was a lot of accretion, you may recall. I presented that, I believe, in October. So the low-flow channels were cleaned out with some large machinery. We placed large woody material as a means to provide refugia for fish habitats, which we will anticipate seeing once the river rises and it inundates. And then the contractor also was responsible for disking and spraying in preparation for planting. They installed drip line throughout the both offset areas, remaining in place. The drip line remains in place. It was all anchored down with their various size anchors, some very big rebar anchors at the ends, smaller anchors in the middle to keep it from being debris in the floodway. They installed irrigation pumps in preparation. You can see all the different wet spaces from the drip lines to indicate where the planting communities were going to go. You can also see a number of little flags. So River Partners has a program to kind of to lay out the different plant palettes, and then they produce flags that says on each location about which tree goes there, or which understory piece goes there. So it's rather informative when you go out there and get up close. From far away, it doesn't really look like a whole lot, but it's kind of interesting. And then in preparation for the flood season, they went in, they removed the fish screens, they removed the lateral lines that inflate when they're full of water. So those won't be interfering with the floodplain inundation this year. They planted extra plants in certain areas. So we had overages. The nurseries were trying to hedge their bets in case there was some losses so that the nurseries didn't have to assume that liability. So those went most of those went along the remnant levee, which we know is going to have more potential for erosion every year that there's inundation. And then we also installed 4 boater signs. These were approved by the Coast Guard. And so hopefully that will also minimize the amount of boat traffic we have in the offset areas once the river levels go up to a place where boats can actually access it. So we'll see how effective that is. And then moving into this year, Plant acceptance, this is something that's really important for the contractor because once plant acceptance occurs, then their monitoring period begins. So there's a lot of discussion between the agency and the contractor about plant acceptance. One thing that they do have to fulfill yet, there are a number of tree cuttings. These are coming from Florida Native Nursery up in Chico. They'll be between 3 and 5 feet long. They'll be driven into the ground right around that large woody material. So the intention is that next year that they will start flourishing as a small tree, and then over time, they will become larger trees. So there's just willows and cottonwoods primarily. The other thing that's going to happen right now, the season's got, a lot of the work got started late, so we were not able to put down native grass seed. It just wasn't, the timing of it wasn't correct. And so that will happen this fall, and that will help to then more stabilize the offset area over time. And then we're working directly with GEI. You just approved the contract amendment with GEI for this mitigation crediting agreement. That has to do with meeting with CDFW as well as the other resource agencies to make sure that not only does the mitigation that we're producing cover Southport, but also has the ability to cover mitigation needs for other future federal projects that we initiate in the West Lip. And then by the end of the year, we will be doing our first annual report on how well we've had plant survival and replacement, et cetera. So that concludes my presentation. Any questions?
I got one. You have a ballpark figure of, we got this total amount of mitigation, and some of it's for future. Do you know how much is expected to be credited towards just this Southport levee project?
Approximate, under 20 acres, between 15 and 20 acres
Okay,
of the 120.
good. Good. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, back to A.
Good morning, Chair and members of the board. So I just want to go over the project updates and speak to a few of them that are included in your packet. Under the finance section, talking about the refunding of the bonds, I just wanted to remind, this turned out to be a really good bond refunding. The timing turned out to be really good as well. I think the last time we reported on this prior to taking action and the pricing and all that, we were looking at net present value savings of just under 8%. And when the bonds closed last Wednesday, we were at a 13% net present value savings, so significantly above where we were the last time we reported. And then, of course, the commensurate savings per year went up from about 140 from the pre-pricing $1,000 per year to $150,000 once the bonds were sold. And that compares with what was reported to the board back in November. We were estimating just a little, about $120,000 a year in savings. So it came out very favorable process and timing.
Work.
We had a lot of help from, well, our treasurer and finance team did a great job in helping us get through that process. On real estate services, staff is doing a great job of wrapping up and submitting some of the last packets to DWR for reimbursement. That's outlined in your staff report, in the progress report. Also, on the former Time Oil site, sampling from the November, results from the November sampling show no remaining contaminants. Good thing. Again, if we have that same results with the spring sampling, then we're going to appeal to the board to close that out. For Southport Bar Restore, we've got the 100% plans submitted, so we're preparing comments to that, as well as the specifications. Again, the plan is to finalize bid documents in February to be able to advertise the project for bid. At that time, we also intend to bring the completed supplemental EIR to the board for certification or authorization. And also staff is working very hard and starting to make some headway, it appears, with the adjacent property owner for that revised borrow agreement now between the agency and River Park. So we'll we'll hope to have news of a completed agreement brought to you hopefully next month for approval. And then I think the board is aware of the award that we received for the Southport project from the Institute of Sustainable Infrastructure. We submitted as a platinum, we stayed as a platinum, and we were awarded platinum. So really good news, and I think a really good notch in WSAFCA's belt for delivering a high-quality, true multi-benefit project. There is anticipated to be a press release from ISI issued in Washington, D.C., where they're headquartered. We have been given opportunity to provide comment, so I would like to perhaps speak with the chair after the board meeting to maybe get a comment from the chair that we can include in the press release. The plan is, once the press release is issued, we also want to work with the city staff to perhaps do a companion piece and do a local press release on or about the same time that the one in DC is issued. So we'll work with the city and see if that makes sense to do. And then on the Borrow One site, staff has completed all the necessary steps and turned in the final documentation. So we should be, once we receive acknowledgement of the last processing of the documents, we should be able to close out the SMARA permit, and then also that would release some of the set-aside funds. I think we have a $1.1 million set aside for that SMARA permit that we can then release and have available to the agency. On the federal project, things are moving along as scheduled. This is for the Yolo Bypass East Levee project. We just received a 35% design submittal from MGE. That's been issued to the agency as well as our partners, DWR and the Corps, for review and comment. We've got about a 2-week comment period. Also, the design program plan was submitted to the Corps. They provided comments. We have responded to those comments and are providing hopefully what will just be a back check from the Corps to get approval on that plan, which we can then look to implement this winter, conditions allowing in the field. This is the elaborate drilling plan to inform for all the geotechnical specifications for the project design. And the 65% design milestone is April, and so we expect to be on schedule for that as well. And that, at this point, is what we with WSAFCA are scoped to do for this first increment. So we'll be having conversations with the Corps between now and then also, depending on what happens with the Corps work plan and federal funding, we'll be deciding between now and then whether we move the ball forward to 100% design or whether that gets turned over to the Corps for them to do. On to federal budget and advocacy. So the Energy and Water Appropriations Bill was approved. The Corps work plan is in final stages of being finalized. It is expected to be delivered and completed on or about February 10, along with the Corps' FY21 budget request. So all eyes are going to be on that work plan. And as the board is aware, district submitted 2 requests, one on the inspections account for the balance of the PED funding, as well as a request for New Start construction and the first increment of construction of about $18.9 million. So fingers crossed for a double whammy with this work plan. Only 2, at max, 2 flood projects can receive a New Start in the FY20 work plan. So we've done a lot of work to get things stacked in our favor. We'll see if the Corps can deliver. And that pretty much, that completes my updates. I'd be happy to answer any questions the board has.
Any questions? Greg, on the Corps' FY21 budget, is that what gets put into the president's budget, or is
Correct.
that like preliminary to what the?
It fulfills the president's budget request.
Okay.
And it goes into the president's budget. If you recall, last year, West Sacramento was named to receive, by project, to receive an additional $400,000 in PED funding, which was included in the appropriations bill. So at minimum, we already have $400,000 additional, well, the Corps has additional $400,000, but, obviously looking to plus that up. So it's possible.
So what happens in this work plan final will influence what we'll see in FY '21?
I certainly hope so. From a construction standpoint, I don't believe the Corps can recommend construction funding
Without it.
in a president's budget without us already receiving a new start. So, at a minimum, we should have the balance of PED, so I would not expect to see anything for WSAC in the '21 president's budget unless we get a new start construction in '20 and they look to plus that up to keep us rolling in '21.
Okay.
But we're not scheduled to go to construction on this first increment until '21, so it's a little bit cart and horse, but who knows? Maybe we'll be in both.
Very good. Okay. Director's comments. Anything? Nope. With that, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.